The rain that night fell like a sad, lingering song, each drop tapping hard on the windshield as Claire sped down the deserted mountain road. The headlights were hazy in the thick fog. She shouldn't be driving in this condition, but she needed to get away from the fake birthday party, where her boyfriend had openly put his arm around another woman, right in front of her, as if she never existed. Claire's eyes were blurred not only by the rain, but by the tears she had no strength to wipe away. Everything was a jumble, a blur. She felt as if she were being strangled by the invisible hands of disappointment and heartache. That was when her wheels skidded on the wet road. It all happened so fast. A crash, a screech, and the car flew off the road, over the edge of the woods. There was a loud crash, and darkness swallowed her. When Claire opened her eyes, the white light shining on the ceiling made her frown. The smell of antiseptic filled her nostrils. A dull pain shot up her arm, making her groan. She tried to turn her head, but her neck hurt. "Don't move too fast," a deep male voice said beside her. A man in a white blouse was sitting by her bed. He was young, in his early 30s, tall with a sharp face but gentle eyes. His wavy brown hair had a few strands that were messy from staying up all night, and there was something in his eyes that made her feel safe. "You're awake. That's great. I'm Dr. Nathaniel Reed. You were in a car accident. Luckily, I was on my way back from my night shift and saw the flashing lights in the woods. If I had been a few minutes later—" His voice was low, his eyes still filled with concern. Claire managed a small nod, her throat dry. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's okay. Get some rest. You have a slight concussion and a dislocated shoulder, but nothing serious." Nathaniel smiled slightly. "I'll stay until you're okay." That night, Claire fell asleep many times, but every time she woke up, she would see him sitting there, sometimes reading medical documents, sometimes just silently watching her, as if he were guarding the sleep of a stranger he had known from another life. The next morning, Nathaniel returned with a hot cup of coffee and some light conversation. "Your name is Claire, right? There's no identification in your wallet, just your art school ID. Are you an artist?" he asked, his eyes shining with genuine concern. Claire nodded, still a little dazed. "I teach art part-time. The rest of the time, I draw for myself." He smiled. "Sounds good. Art is better therapy than medicine sometimes." A few days later, when Claire was sober enough to leave the hospital, Nathaniel hesitantly invited her to his villa in the northern suburbs, an hour's drive from the city. "I know this is a bit sudden, but I don't think you should live alone when you're still this weak. I have a spare room, and the maid will take care of the rest. Don't worry, no one will bother you." Claire was stunned. She had long since grown accustomed to unconditional kindness. She was used to being taken advantage of, lied to. But with this man, there were no flirtatious looks, no gestures that crossed the line. Only sincerity. She agreed, partly because there was no one else to turn to, and partly because she didn't understand why her heart fluttered a little every time he entered the room. The Reed house was nestled among the maple trees in their fall foliage. The space was quiet, windy, and the sunlight filtered through the glass windows. Claire had gotten used to Nathaniel making her coffee every morning, leaving a note with a few words like, "Take your medicine on time," or "It's a nice day, you should go out to the garden and try drawing." Claire began to feel her heart soften. The pain of her ex-boyfriend faded. In Nathaniel's gentle, discreet care, she found a sense of appreciation. No strings attached, no pressure. Just enough silence to mend a broken woman's heart. That evening, as Claire sat on a wicker chair on the porch, watching the sunset fade through the trees, she heard heavy footsteps behind her. She turned and met a gaze, not unlike Nathaniel's. The man was taller, with unruly black hair and deep gray eyes that seemed to hide a dark memory. "Are you a new guest?" His voice was low and somewhat cold. Claire nodded slightly. "I'm Claire. I had an accident, Nathaniel. Help me." The man just nodded, didn't smile, didn't introduce himself. Then he walked into the house, leaving a strange chill in his wake. Claire watched, her heart beating slightly faster. There was something in his eyes, not exactly hostile, but definitely unwelcoming. The next morning, while having breakfast with Nathaniel, Claire caught a glimpse of the man walking through the living room, this time wearing a dark shirt, holding a cup of coffee. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Nathaniel noticed the silence and said, "Ah, that's my brother, Julian. Julian Reed." The name lingered in her mind all morning. Julian didn't eat breakfast with them. He often left early and returned late, and Claire would sometimes find him sitting alone in the backyard in the middle of the night, an old book in his hand, his eyes staring into the distance. It seemed like he was avoiding her on purpose, or simply didn't want to be involved with anyone in this house. Claire began to wonder, why were the two brothers so opposite? Nathaniel was gentle, open, and warm. Julian was quiet, cold and full of secrets. But the strange thing was, Claire didn't hate Julian. On the contrary, she began to pay attention to his every step, every glance from afar. One day, she accidentally dropped her scarf while walking in the garden. That evening, when she opened her door, she found it neatly folded on the bed. There was no note, no one said anything. But she knew it was Julian. Another time, the wind picked up, and she was struggling to close the window when Julian came in from outside and quietly stepped forward to help her close the latch. "Be careful. The wind here is not as gentle as it looks," he said softly, then turned away, leaving her with her heart pounding at the mere words. Claire began to see that Julian was not quite who he appeared to be. She saw in his eyes an old scar, not visible on his skin, but deep in his soul, a wound that had not healed. "Didn't Nathaniel tell you?" asked the maid Martha one afternoon, watching Claire watch Julian's back. Julian was a military doctor. An accident on duty cost him someone very close to him. He changed after that, quiet, distant. Claire understood and felt her heart flutter with a strange sympathy. She didn't know why, but Julian's silence made her want to get closer. Not to change him, but to understand the reason behind the wall he built. She felt guilty towards Nathaniel, the man who saved her life, who took care of her every day. But then, every time she accidentally caught Julian's eyes at the end of the hallway, or when their hands briefly touched in the kitchen, Claire felt her heart tremble uncontrollably. Her heart, which had been warmed by Nathaniel's kindness, now began to vibrate with a dark, powerful, and mysterious spirit. Time passed like a gentle breeze through the autumn garden, leaving pale rays of sunlight on the stone porch. Claire recovered day by day, her cheeks rosy again, her gentle voice no longer trembling. Nathaniel was always by her side, taking care of her with a patience and kindness that would make any woman fall in love. He often took her for a walk around the lake every afternoon, telling her about his years studying abroad in Europe, his passion for architecture, and his small dreams like building a simple home in the pine forest. Claire listened, sometimes smiling, sometimes moved. She knew that the man's heart was set on her presence, but every time he looked at her with passionate eyes, Claire felt lost, because inside her heart doesn't belong to Nathaniel. Julian was still the same, quiet, avoiding her, but always there when she least expected it. Once, as she stumbled down the stairs, he came from somewhere to catch her, his arms tightening instinctively, and then letting go immediately, as if afraid his emotions would spiral out of control. "Your eyes should be on the road, not looking for someone in your dreams," he said softly, his gaze glancing over her face before looking away. That sentence made Claire's heart clench. The long nights became a struggle. In her room, she buried her face in the pillow, tears falling from her own confused emotions. She was grateful to Nathaniel, touched by his feelings for her, but just by accidentally hearing Julian's footsteps passing by the door, she felt her heart flutter like a young girl. She tried to avoid him, tried to spend more time with Nathaniel, tried to be cheerful, to open up, even to tell jokes just to see him smile. And Nathaniel, always gentle, always responded with gentle eyes and hopeful gestures. One evening, he invited her to a candlelit dinner in the garden behind the villa. The night breeze was cool, the crickets chirped in the grass, and the flickering candlelight reflected in Nathaniel's brown eyes. "Claire," he took her hand, his hand warm and steady, "I know you're not ready, and I don't expect you to answer right away, but I want you to know I love you, I really do." Claire froze. Her heart trembled. Nathaniel's eyes never left hers, as if he was betting everything on this moment. She squeezed his hand gently, her voice choked. "I am very grateful to you. Without you, I probably wouldn't have lived until today." I am touched, very much. But that is not love. Claire walked back to her dark room that night, her heart in turmoil. She wondered, could love come from gratitude? Could she force herself to love someone just because he saved her life? The answer was cruel, but her heart responded, and it wasn't to the hand that had just held hers in the flower garden. Julian was more distant than ever. He no longer appeared in the hallway, no longer helped her close the window or put the towels on the bed. But his eyes, when they met by chance on the stairs or at breakfast, still smoldered like a suppressed fire. Claire began to lose sleep. The nightmares came like ghosts. One night, she screamed in her sleep. The old nightmare returned, the screeching of tires, the car crashing into a cliff, the sound of shattering glass. She woke with a start, sweat beading her forehead. But then she froze when she realized Julian was there, sitting next to her bed, his face worried. "You screamed. I heard it," he whispered. She said nothing, just looked at him, choking. Julian reached out to wipe the sweat from her cheek, his hand lightly touching her cheek, which was burning with shame. At that moment, the distance between them was only a few centimeters. She looked into those deep gray eyes and realized she could not lie anymore. Julian looked at her too, his lips parted as if he wanted to say something. Then, in that fragile moment between waking and dreaming, they leaned towards each other, until Julian suddenly stood up. He turned away, his voice hoarse. "I shouldn't be here." Claire sat back, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt like a part of her had been torn apart, and perhaps a part of Julian had too. From that day on, the atmosphere between the three of them seemed to be extremely tense. Nathaniel began to notice something different. He didn't say anything, but his eyes were no longer carefree, but instead had a hidden worry. Silent questions rang out during breakfast. Julian avoided the meal together. Claire remained silent, as if afraid that just one word would shatter the mask she was wearing. She stood between two men. One was her savior, her safe embrace, her smooth path forward. The other was a storm she could not resist, strong, dark, and so alluring that she was willing to risk her peace. But feelings, as she was slowly coming to understand, were not something that could be hidden forever. Claire couldn't stand the silence between the three of them. She decided to go find Julian, wanting to end things before hurting anyone else. She found him in the small room behind the garage where he often retreated when he was sad. The room was dark. The only light coming from the window was his face as he sat silently at his old easel. Claire walked in, calling softly, "Julian." He didn't turn around, but his hoarse voice rang out. "I know." "Know what?" she asked softly. "I love you." The words rang out as a relief, and a sentence at the same time. Claire said nothing, just stood there. Julian turned around. For the first time, she saw in his eyes a raw pain, like a wound that had never healed. "Claire, you don't know how hard I tried not to love you," Julian said, the words falling from his lips. "Because I have no right to. Not after what happened in the past. Not when I owe Nathaniel my life." Claire walked over and sat down opposite him. "Julian, what past? You deserve to know." He was silent for a long moment, then handed her an old crumpled photograph. A girl with a bright smile stood beside him, and immediately Claire recognized those eyes, the same tormented look Julian had whenever he looked at her. "Her name was Eliza," Julian began. "I loved her, more than life itself. We were going to get married, but that day, the day I had a fight with Nathaniel, I left her on the way home. It was raining. She got into an accident. I never got to say sorry." His voice broke. "Nathaniel was there when I broke down. He took me to therapy, protected me from the media and public. Without him, I wouldn't have survived." Claire took his hand. "Julian, you can't live with your mistakes forever." "It's not a mistake." He looked at her, eyes red. "It's a punishment. And you're a reward I don't deserve." She shook her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Then why do you care about me? Why did you come that night when I had a nightmare? Why do your eyes always follow me?" Julian was silent for a long time. Then he exhaled, as if releasing the burden of life. Because I love you. Those 3 words finally broke through the wall he had built all this time. He bowed his head, his voice trembling. But I will back out if that makes you happy. If Nathaniel is the one you choose, I will disappear. Claire sat there stunned, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The door behind them swung open. Nathaniel stood there, his face white. Claire was stunned. Julian was frozen. The silence fell as heavy as a stone. So, I fell in love with someone who always looked out for my brother. Nathaniel smiled coldly. So my kindness was unnecessary. No! Claire stood up abruptly. I didn't mean to. I didn't know it would go this far. Nathaniel took a step back. I just want you to be happy, Claire. But I didn't expect that it wouldn't be me. Julian stepped forward. Nathaniel, I'm sorry. I never meant to. Enough, Nathaniel interrupted. You mean everything to me, but I will not hold you with pity. Claire's eyes welled up with tears. Nathaniel, I can't stay here any longer. I need time. All 3 of us. She looked at both men, her heart breaking. Each loved her in a different way. One was the sun, bright, gentle, safe. The other was the night, fierce, uncertain, but enchanting. But she needed to understand her heart before hurting them again. The next morning, Claire left the villa. No one saw her off at the gate. She walked away carrying a small suitcase and a broken heart. The early winter wind blew across the fields, carrying the smell of cold soil and a new beginning. She didn't know what would happen. Julian stood on the balcony, silently watching her figure fade away. Nathaniel buried himself in the drawing room, where he had once dreamed of a small home. Each person now has to face their own pain. Time begins to flow at a different pace, quietly, slowly, but it is also the time for each person to look back, mature, and listen to the true calling from their heart. A year has passed since Claire left the villa. She lives in a small town in the northern woods, where the cobblestone streets are as quiet as a child's nap. There, Claire rents a simple wooden house with windows overlooking a garden of maple trees that turn red every autumn. She teaches art at a community center for children with special needs. The children's bright paintings hang on the walls, a reminder that no matter how dark the past, the human heart can learn to love again. Claire was no longer the young lady who had run away from her status or the misunderstood maid. She was Claire, an independent woman, standing on her own 2 feet. But in her winter dreams, she would sometimes see those 2 eyes, one warm, one sad. She had not contacted Julian or Nathaniel since the day they had parted, though her hand had trembled many times as she reached for the phone and put it back down. Until one autumn afternoon, when the first wind of the season blew through the deciduous trees, Julian appeared. Claire had just stepped out of class, her hands stained with paint, when she saw him standing at the end of the hallway. He was no longer the stoic man from a year ago. Julian now had a carefree look. His hair was a little longer, his eyes were no longer tired, but it was still the same look, sincere, deep, that made her heart clench. Hello, Claire. His voice was still low but softer than before. Claire stood still, taking a few seconds to believe she wasn't dreaming. You? Why are you here? Julian stepped closer. I came to you, not because I wanted to make amends, but because I forgave myself. She looked at him, saying nothing. Julian pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was a painting of her standing in a field of lavender, her brushstrokes unfinished. I kept it for a year. Every time I looked at it, I remembered why I loved life. Claire turned away, tears welling up in her eyes. Julian, over the past year, I have learned to live without anyone by my side. I no longer have to prove anything, but that doesn't mean I have forgotten. He nodded slightly. I didn't come here to make you choose. I just want to say something that a year ago, I didn't have the courage to say. I love you. And if your heart still has room for me, I won't run away anymore. Claire was silent for a long time. Inside, all the emotions exploded. The days when she was angry with him, missed him, and felt guilty towards Nathaniel, all appeared like a slow-motion film. Julian, she whispered, I don't owe anyone anything anymore. I don't have to be someone anyone wants me to be. I'm not a princess or someone's muse. I'm just Claire, and this time I want to love with all my heart. He said nothing, just walked over and gently took her hand. They walked together to the backyard of the center, where an old maple tree stood silently in the golden autumn afternoon. Leaves fell on their shoulders like a blessing from heaven and earth. No more hospital, no more gratitude, no more past that weighed them down like chains. Just two people left, one true love. Claire rested her head on his shoulder. Julian squeezed her hand, for the first time without fear, without remorse. Just hearts, beating as one. In the gentle afternoon they knew, there would be nothing left to hide. Thank you for following the story. If you love emotional and surprising stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. See you in the next video.